Rain slid down the cracked windows of the tiny garage at the edge of town, turning the outside world into a blur of gray, while inside the air smelled of oil, iron, and quiet exhaustion. Daniel had spent the entire morning bent over the open hood of a rusted sedan, his hands black with grease, his back aching in the familiar way that reminded him life had never been easy and likely never would be. The sign above the garage door flickered weakly, as if even electricity struggled to believe in this forgotten place. When he heard the uneven rhythm of footsteps crossing the wet pavement outside, he assumed it was another customer coming to complain about prices they already knew he kept lower than anyone else's. But the sound was different, slow, dragging, interrupted by the dull tap of metal against concrete. He looked up and saw her standing in the doorway, Rain clinging to her dark coat, her hair damp against her pale face, one hand gripping a crutch while the other steadied the awkward brace strapped around her right leg. She didn't look like someone who belonged in a broken garage at the edge of a tired town. There was something refined in the way she held herself, even in pain, something guarded in her eyes as if she had learned not to trust easily. She asked him, her voice calm but edged with fatigue, whether he could repair metal joints. Not in a car, but in the brace that allowed her to walk. Daniel hesitated only a second before kneeling to examine it, noticing the cracked hinge, the cheap welding that had already begun to split, the misalignment that forced her knee into an unnatural angle. He wasn't a doctor, he told her honestly, just a mechanic who fixed engines and farm equipment, but she gave a faint smile and replied that doctors had already tried and failed, and what she needed now was someone who understood how metal should move without breaking. There was something in the way she said it, less desperation and more quiet challenge, that made him feel this was more than a simple repair. He invited her inside, pulled up an old wooden chair, and carefully unfastened the brace while she watched him with an intensity that made his hands unusually steady. As he worked, he studied not only the damaged hinge but the way her leg responded when she shifted her weight, how pain flickered across her face even when she tried to hide it, how the brace was designed more for appearance than real support. He asked a few practical questions about the accident, and she answered vaguely, saying only that it had changed everything. He didn't push further. Instead, he began sketching ideas on the back of an old receipt, explaining how he could redistribute pressure along the calf and thigh, how a lighter alloy might reduce strain, how a double-hinged joint could mimic natural motion instead of forcing rigidity. She listened as if he were describing something miraculous, though to him it was just logic and experience gained from years of making broken machines work again. Over the next several hours, sparks flew as he cut and reshaped scrap aluminum, welding with careful precision while she remained seated nearby, occasionally wincing when a sudden movement sent pain through her leg. He adjusted measurements repeatedly, refusing to settle for good enough, driven by something he didn't fully understand, perhaps pride, perhaps simple human decency. When he finally reattached the modified hinge and helped her stand, he felt the weight of expectation settle between them. She gripped the edge of the workbench, inhaled slowly, and took one tentative step. The usual dragging sound was softer. She blinked in surprise. Another step followed, steadier this time. Though it wasn't perfect yet, it was better, noticeably better, and hope flickered across her face so quickly it almost hurt to witness. She looked at him as if he had done something extraordinary, but he simply shrugged, saying it would take a few more days to refine it properly. For the first time since she entered, she allowed herself a genuine smile, and in that small, oil-stained garage, surrounded by rust and rain, something unspoken began to change for both of them. A month passed after she walked out of his garage without the crutch, leaving behind only the faint memory of her perfume mixed with metal and rain, and Daniel forced himself to believe that was the end of it, that sometimes people drift into your life like passing storms and disappear just as quietly. The garage returned to its usual rhythm of rattling engines and bargaining customers, and he buried himself in routine to avoid wondering where she was or whether the brace was still holding strong. Then, on an otherwise ordinary morning, the calm shattered under the thunderous roar of helicopter blades slicing through the sky above the empty lot beside his shop. Tools clattered from his hands as dust spiraled through the open garage door, scattering old invoices and sending loose bolts skittering across the floor. Neighbors rushed outside, pointing upward, whispering in disbelief as the sleek aircraft descended with deliberate precision, its polished surface reflecting sunlight like something from another world entirely. Daniel stepped out slowly, heart pounding in his chest, grease still streaking his forearms, feeling absurdly small against the spectacle unfolding in front of him. The helicopter touched down, and from it emerged two men in tailored suits, their movements sharp and efficient, scanning the area as if ensuring safety before allowing the final passenger to step onto the cracked pavement. When she appeared, Daniel barely recognized her at first. Gone was the soaked coat and guarded posture. Now she wore an elegant charcoal suit that fit her perfectly, her hair styled neatly, her expression composed yet unmistakably warm as her eyes found his. She walked toward him with steady confidence. No limp, no crutch, each step smooth and assured, and though the custom brace he had built was hidden beneath expensive fabric, he could see in the way her leg moved that his design was still there, still working. Cameras flashed from a distance, and murmurs rippled through the small crowd as someone whispered her name. A name Daniel had never known but now heard spoken with awe, attached to titles like investor, philanthropist, tech magnate. She stopped only a few feet away from him, the wind from the helicopter tugging gently at her jacket, and for a moment the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them standing in the dust and noise. She thanked him again, but this time her voice carried a weight of revelation as she explained that she wasn't simply a woman recovering from an accident. She owned companies that designed medical technology, companies that had spent millions attempting to solve the very problem he had approached with scrap metal and instinct. After a devastating car crash that nearly ended her life, she had watched the best surgeons and engineers fail to restore her mobility without unbearable pain. Disillusioned and exhausted by promises wrapped in sterile white walls, she chose to disappear for a while, to test something simple. Whether genuine skill and compassion still existed beyond corporate labs and glossy presentations. She had hidden her identity because she wanted to be seen as a person, not a portfolio. And he had passed the test without even knowing there was one. Daniel stood speechless as she revealed that his design had already been replicated by her engineers, refined but fundamentally unchanged, because its brilliance lay in its simplicity. She had established a new initiative to produce affordable mobility devices for people who could never dream of paying premium prices, and she wanted him, not as a symbolic gesture, but as the lead innovator guiding the entire project. The men beside her stepped forward with documents outlining funding that dwarfed anything he had ever imagined, figures that made his modest garage seem like a different lifetime. Yet what shocked him most wasn't the money or the helicopter or the realization that she was a millionaire many times over. It was that she had come back personally, choosing gratitude over convenience. She told him she never forgot the way he refused payment, how he focused solely on solving her pain rather than calculating profit, and that integrity was rarer than wealth in her world. As the wind settled and the crowd continued to stare, Daniel looked from his worn sign to the shining aircraft and felt the ground shift beneath his understanding of what was possible. A single act of kindness, offered without expectation, had built a bridge between two entirely different worlds, and standing there in the swirling dust, he realized his life was about to change in ways he could never have predicted when a limping stranger first stepped into his garage on a rainy afternoon.